Hi guys, Mom here for another episode of For the Boys. But before we get into it, I want to make sure that Matt and Liam, please call your brother on Thursday. It's his 25th birthday. So happy birthday, Kevin. We love you so much. All right, so for this episode, it really does start where the last one left off. So if you remember last time when we were talking about Harold Cook's personal effects, I found them in a big red bin in my closet, and that's where I have a bunch of genealogy stuff that I need to go through. Well, when I was putting the Harold Cook effects away, I decided to kind of dig through the red bin and see what else I could find in there. And there's lots of great stuff. But today I'm going to talk to you about something I found right at the very bottom of the red bin. And it is a box that my father, Gary Martin, had sent to me probably a number of years ago. And I remember opening it and looking through it and thinking, oh, this is amazing stuff. And then we moved a couple of times and it's gone in and out of storage and ended up in this red bin. And of course it's not cataloged. But I opened this box and there's amazing things in there relating to my grandfather, so your great-grandfather, and his name is Howard Garrison Martin Sr., because my father is Howard Garrison Martin Jr., but my grandfather went by Abe. And in this box was military paraphernalia. Maybe that's not the right word. It's military information about Abe Martin during his time in the Army in World War II. And so it's pretty amazing stuff. There's a lot in there. I don't think we're going to get through it all in this episode, but I just wanted to let you know where I found it. And we're going to go kind of deeper into Abe Martin's military records today. And I look forward to showing you. I know that this is a horrible quality of the photograph. It was scanned and it just did not scan very clearly. But I wanted to include it because I think it is just so reminiscent of your great-grandfather. He was always smiling. He loved family. And this was an opportunity, you know, Matt, when you were less than a year old, to meet your great-grandfather, to spend a little bit of time with him. He loved holding you and playing with you. So obviously this is probably in, so you were born in 95, so this is probably in 96 sometime when Dad and I took you to Wheeling, West Virginia to meet your great-grandfather, and he just absolutely loved you so much. Your great-grandfather, Abe Martin, lived an absolutely incredible life. He lived for 92 years, and he made the most out of everything that he did. So here we are back at the online family tree, and I would just like to show you some of the genealogical records that I have for him to put his military career in context. So Matt, you once again are the home person, and since this is on my side, we come down to the bottom here, and then here's my father, Gary Martin, and then his father is Howard Garrison Martin Sr. If we click on him, we can see that he was born on February 22nd, 1908 in Charlotte, which is in Monongalia County, West Virginia, and he died on August 8th, 2000. In between that, he lived, as I said, lived a pretty incredible life. Nothing more important than marrying the love of his life, Mary Ruth Osborne. They had two children, my dad, Gary Martin, or Howard Garrison Martin Jr., and my aunt, Catherine Bell Martin, who goes by Kitty. Now, it's probably easiest to go to the gallery here to see some of the pictures that we have and some of the documents. One of the things that I think will put a little bit in context here is the wedding announcement to Grandma Ruth. Now, this is in 1937, and this is actually the second page of the wedding announcement in the Charleston Gazette, which is Charleston, West Virginia. But it says here that the bride is a graduate of Union High School and West Liberty Teachers College. Mr. Martin, who is Abe, a son of Mr. and Mrs. Joseph W. Martin of Morgantown, is a graduate of West Virginia University with the class of 1931 and is affiliated with the Pi Kappa Phi National social fraternity and the Fort Henry chapter of the Reserve Officers Association. He's also an instructor and athletic director at the McKinley Trade School in Wheeling. So right off the bat, we know that he did some ROTC kinds of programs when he was in college, and I think that we'll see how that is reflected in his military record in just a little bit. A couple of other things that I want to show you from the gallery here is, here's a picture of me and my grandfather. He took lots of pictures. I'm not exactly sure when this was, but I think I was in my early 20s there. A couple of other things. There's a picture right here that I'm actually holding Kevin. Now, I'm not sure where Matt was at this point. Just not in the picture, I guess. But over here is Grandpa Abe. By this time, Grandma Ruth had died. She died in 1980, I believe. So this is Grandpa Abe's friend, Harriet. Obviously me and Kevin. Here's my Aunt Kitty. Here is Aunt Tanya and Uncle Eric. And this was taken in Massillon, Ohio, where Kitty lives and where ultimately Grandpa Abe lived at the end of his life. A few more things to show here is the wedding announcement, or I'm sorry, wedding certificate of Howard Garrison Martin and Mary Ruth Osborne. He loved his Ruthie. And then, let's see, I have a picture here of my Grandpa Abe, and this is at my wedding to your dad in 1994. So this is Grandpa Martin, this is Gary Martin, this is your great-grandfather Abe, and this is your Uncle Eric. And let's see, I thought there was one more document that I wanted to show. We do have his death certificate. He died, like I said, in 2000, just deteriorating health, pretty much. But if we can go back to the facts, I think that there was something that I wanted to show you here. And marriage index, Social Security, West Virginia births. I guess not. I guess that pretty much covers everything. I guess we can go to a very first census record when he was 2 years old. This would be in 1910. And if we can look at this, his father was Joseph Wharton, and his mother was Annie McClure. And so he had two older sisters, Leota and Nellie. And then he had one younger brother, Hubert, who was, I think, like 10 or 11 years younger. And Hubert just passed away maybe just a couple of years ago. But there is the 1910 census. The military records that we're going to be focusing on today for your great-grandfather, Abe Martin, were put together by your grandfather, Gary Martin. He put them in this bound volume, and this is the cover page, which also serves as a table of contents. I am not going to be able to go through the entire thing. There is just way too much. But I do want to concentrate on three different areas. First, I want to concentrate on his active duty, stateside, and his deployment to the South Pacific. I also want to concentrate on the medals and awards that he received before he retired from the military altogether. I love these two pictures of Abe. The one on the left, obviously, he's younger. He may still even be in college when he's in the ROTC program, or maybe just out of college. He's fresh-faced, he's hopeful, he's bright, he's smiling still. And, obviously it's before World War II. The one on the right, however, much more serious Abe. It is dated March 30th of 1945, and he's seen some things. He is a major in the Army. This is an identification card from the War Department. And you can just tell that he's had a little bit more responsibility, a little bit more experience, and that things are just a little more serious. Abe Martin's military record contains many pages that look just like this. Over on the left-hand side, we see it's the officers and warrant officers qualification card. This one I like because it shows his past education. So close to the top, it says he went to 4 years at Morgantown High School. He went to 4 years for West Virginia University, where he majored in engineering, and 2 years at the University of Pittsburgh for education. As you look down a little bit more, you see his main civilian occupation. So between 1931 and 1941, when he was called up to active duty, he taught courses related to aviation at trade school and coached basketball and football. He was a mechanical and electrical engineer. Now, something that is not on this page, but on a very similar page, is that he was promoted several times during the 10 years between he graduated West Virginia University and when he was called up to active service. So in 1930, in May 28th of 1930, he was a second lieutenant. So he actually became a second lieutenant while he was in college. Then on June 9th, 1933, he became a first lieutenant. In December of 1940, he became a captain. So he was a captain already in the Army by the time the war broke out. And as part of his ROTC training, he was an officer. There was no question of whether or not he was going to war. He was older, but he was experienced and he had training. Down here, kind of in the bottom part of this page, we look at his primary Army jobs here. And he's an assistant division engineer. He's an executive officer, and he's a superintendent at an automobile school at, I believe it's Fort Lewis in Washington. But way down here where there's all sorts of writing, these are the different courses that he took after he went into the full-time Army in 1941. You can see he took pistol courses, he was a sharpshooter, he took infiltration courses, night infiltration courses, bayonet course, grenade record course. He was qualified in aerial and photography reading. All sorts of very interesting malaria control training, fire transition course, very interesting kinds of things that he needed to know in order to do his job as the war progressed. Now, I have to admit, my knowledge about World War II, especially the Pacific Theater, is limited. It's limited to documentaries that I've seen. It's limited to what I remember from high school history. I know more about the European theater because of Band of Brothers, I think. But what happened in the Pacific, I know was all about the islands and making sure that we took control of the islands so that we could get closer and closer to Japan to ultimately drop a bomb on Japan. Now, that's very simplified, and I know it's much more it's much more complicated than that. But looking through your great-grandfather's military records, he was right in the thick of things. Up here on the left, where you see itinerary, this is his active duty in the Pacific. You can see that he is leaving the United States on June 16th of 1944, and he is hitting all of these islands. Now, something that we have to remember, and I don't think I've already explained this to you, is my understanding is that your great-grandfather was instrumental in overseeing the building of airplane landing strips on these islands. So once the United States got control of these islands, then he would come in and with his army of engineers and make airplane landing strips, so then we could just start island hopping closer and closer to Japan. Again, that's much too simplified, but his work was dangerous. His work was instrumental to our victory in the Pacific and ultimately the victory in World War II. And you can see the timeline there in the itinerary of what he was doing. And he was in charge of a lot of things. What's on the right here is what he was doing after he was out of the Pacific and pretty much after World War II was over. He stayed in the military and was part of this Fort Lewis in Washington. He was a supervisor of an automobile plant. Now, I'm sure there's more to it. It's not like Ford or Chevy or something like that, but I think it was military vehicles. But the big thing is that General Eisenhower visited on to that base and to that automobile plant that your great-grandfather supervised. And we can see here from this informal check sheet that evidently General Eisenhower was very pleased with what he saw. So this is something from a lieutenant colonel, and it says, during the visit and tour of the specialist schools on the 20th of February, 1946, by the Chief of Staff of U.S. Army General Eisenhower, was very favorably impressed by the appearance of all the schools. Time permitted the general to visit only the automotive school, but after this visit and tour of the school areas, he remarked, quote, not only very interesting, but also very efficient, end quote. And so the lieutenant colonel says, it pleases me greatly to pass on this remark to those who earned it, the men actually on the job. So this automotive school, again, I'm certain that it was military vehicles, but your great-grandfather, Abe Martin, was in charge of that. And he got to meet General Eisenhower and tour the facility. So these are two pictures of your great-grandfather with General Eisenhower, who a couple of years later, probably 6 years later, ended up to being the President of the United States. Abe wrote home as often as he could. And I've seen this picture before, and I love it. He is on an island, and he is holding a crab in his hands. And the note at the top says, October 4th, 1944. Now, if we looked at the itinerary that I showed before, October 4th of 1944, that means that he is on the island of Ulithi, U-L-I-T-H-I. And we absolutely have to do some research onto what was going on the island of Ulithi at that point in time. But this photograph was taken by the official photographer, and he writes, Abe writes, the morning after the typhoon. As you can tell by looking at the coconut trees, the wind still had a high velocity. Notice especially the tree to my left. This is the crab that got into my tent. In this picture, he looks rather small, but if you look closely, I have his body in my right hand with one of his claws in my left. And that funny looking drape is a poncho. So he is on these islands. Look how wild it is. And there was a typhoon, and he is sleeping in a tent, and one of these crabs crawled into his tent. The letters that he wrote home are amazing, and the letters that Ruth wrote back to him are equally amazing, and we have saved so many of those, and that obviously is going to be a subject for another day and another time. But on the right, because of all the amazing work that your great-grandfather did, especially in the Pacific, he was recommended for the Bronze Star. And what this says on the right is, Major Howard G. Martin, Corps of Engineers, 155th Engineer Combat Battalion, United States Army, for meritorious service in sustained operational activities against the enemy from December 1st, 1943 to May 25th, 1945. During the preparation of this unit for combat duty, as a Shore Party Engineer Battalion, Major Martin demonstrated outstanding leadership and organizing ability. His constant vigilance and close personal supervision, particularly during combat landing rehearsals, enabled the unit to take prompt and effective corrective action, creating a high standard of efficiency. During the landings and engineer work of this unit on Ulithi Atoll, where this picture was taken, Palau Island, Palau Group, and Leyte, Philippine Islands, Major Martin was responsible for the coordination of the staff members and company commanders in their duties. A large share of the credit for their success is due to the foresight and determination of Major Martin, who followed up on all problems encountered and insisted on the correct solutions. Major Martin's tireless efforts and devotion to duty contributed materially to the rapid development of the island bases and to the general success of the operations. And this was addressed to care of Mrs. Howard G. Martin, his wife, Lucas Lane, Grass Valley, California. There's no question that your great-grandfather's military service record is remarkable. We've seen just a few of the documents that are in his entire military record, and it would take me hours and hours to try to make more of these videos on each one of these documents. So, you know, in the future, we will definitely do more, but I think this story then lends itself to a couple of other stories that are similar, or at least at the same time, including there's a report that my grandfather, your great-grandfather, wrote about Palau Islands and some of those islands in the Pacific when he was on board the ships. And that is something that I need to research a little bit more before I present it to you, but that is fascinating stuff. And there's also the diary that Ruth wrote while Abe was gone. And my dad, your grandfather, Gary Martin, has put that together as well. Ruth's diary and some of the letters and postcards that Abe wrote to her at the same time. So there's kind of a back and forth between the two of them. And it is lovely. It is just so informational, if that's a word. It really is a timeline of what's happening during those World War II years that you can't get in any textbook, and there's no documentary to tell you how really it affected the lives of not only the soldiers, but also of the families and the wives and the children of those soldiers as they're deployed on ships in the Pacific. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Again, there's so much more to this story. We definitely need to talk to Grandpa Martin about this because I know that he'll have lots more information. But I hope you just got a little bit of information, certainly that you have more respect for your great-grandfather and the service that he gave to our country. I love you guys. Don't forget, you're making history today.